Welcome to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today we're going to discuss outlining tips for the online bar exam. Your Bar Exam Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the bar exam experience so you can study effectively, stay sane, and hopefully pass and move on with your life. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on your favorite listening app and check out our sister podcast, the Law School Toolbox podcast. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on barexamtoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking about outlining for online bar exams, which is hard to believe, but we're actually coming up on the third online bar exam for many bar takers. And this is something we're continuing to get questions about from students and from listeners about the best way to outline when you're taking a remote bar exam. And this was really a hard thing for us to figure out, and probably not something we'd really want to do, because we generally advocate for outlining on paper as much as possible. But now it is simply not possible.
Yeah, we had to have a big team meeting over Zoom where we all sat and brainstormed the best way to do this because we don't think it's the best way to outline, but the online bar kind of changed everything. So we have developed best practices, and we've been, of course, testing them out with students over the last couple rounds of the bar. And we even just released an updated version of our UBE Writing of the Week course that actually includes typed and handwritten outlines, so students can really experiment with what is the best solution for them. So after all that work, and boy, was redoing that course a big project, we clearly have a few thoughts, which shouldn't be surprising to anyone. We seem to have thoughts about just about everything.
That's true. I mean, I guess before we really dive in, why have we generally been against online outlining? People have always been like, oh, I'll just type my outline. It'll be fine. I'll just type it and start writing and everything will be faster.
Yeah. My biggest complaint is that students often don't outline. They think they're outlining, but what they're really doing is they're just starting to write and not doing that planning process that we know leads to better outcomes with issue spotting and, managing your time and deciding what you really need to be talking about. So the biggest danger with starting to have your fingers fly on the keyboard is that you just won't do it, that you're just going to dive into writing.
Yeah, and then it's kind of stream of consciousness, and it just doesn't really work that well.
No. Also, I think that the nature of the screen makes it somewhat difficult because the outline often just gets pushed to the bottom as you continue working. And one of the things that I think an outline on paper really does is lets you have kind of that anchor of checking where you are in the process of the question. So you don't forget, oh, I have a major issue coming up at the bottom. And, that's something that we have to always keep in mind. We don't want to be in a situation where we are writing the most eloquent answer to issue number 2, but we forget that issue number 4 is the big point collector. And then we bomb the question because we never got to question number 4 because we forgot about it because it was at the bottom of the outline and that is not even on the screen anymore.
Right. And I think the other time some things that can happen is people just write too much if they are particularly, if you're working on a MEE essay, which is only 30 minutes. Sometimes people will spend all this time outlining and then they really don't have time to write the question. So I think the handwriting process can keep people from over outlining because you just don't write as much if you're writing by hand. So, overall, I'm not sure we're ever going to be advocates of necessarily online outlining, but there are ways to make the best of it. And also, you don't really have a choice. So you have to do this.
Right. Yeah. So, and to each their own, maybe you'll find out this is such a better way for you to do it, even if the bar becomes in person again. But yeah, I don't know that I'm ever going to fully change my opinions on this, but, I'm trying to be flexible.
Right. We do our best.
We're doing our best. Yes. So let's first focus on the essay question. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the performance test as well. So one of the things that we never want to lose in the outlining process, even if you're going to do it on the screen, is the structure of the call of the question that you're using the outline to create the structure for your answer. So sometimes the call of the question is going to give you the legal issues that are going to be in your answer. So if you have a crim question, you might have, a prompt number 1, can A be charged with first or second degree murder? And then a prompt number 2, can B be charged as an accomplice? So, your outline is going to have like one that says, can A be charged with first or second degree murder? And then there's another line that says, can B be charged as an accomplice? That immediately already starts your outline. But you're also going to have some questions that are my very favorite discuss prompts, which
discuss.
Just kind of discuss,
like, whatever you feel like talking about, talk about it.
Chat about whatever you think is important. But even then, you're going to have some idea of what the legal issues are. If it's a contracts question, you might have, formation, breach, specific performance. Like just from reading the facts, you're probably going to have an idea of what the structure is. So you do want to make sure that you're building out that structure, because that organization of your answer is one of the key things that's happening in the outlining process, whether it's on the computer or on your scratch paper.
Right, because ultimately these are generally going to turn into headers in the essay, and maybe it's headers and subheaders. If question A or question 1 is, can A be charged with first or second degree murder? I'm probably seeing some subheaders in there that have first degree murder, second degree murder, for that discussion. So I think getting that structure down so everything is very clean and clear and crisp is definitely going to help, because those are essentially your headers.
Yeah, and remember that these graders are grading very quickly. So this structure is critical to them easily giving you points. I again recently read somebody's failing answers which showed me that through poor organization, I don't think that they actually saw all the little legal issues that were hidden in there.
Right.
And there's nothing you can do about that. You have to wave a flag in front of these graders' faces to show what you're talking about. And you do this by being super organized, by following your IRAC or CRAC structure, and making it easy for them to see what you're going to talk about. It. Planning leads you down that road.
Right, exactly. It's going to be basically disastrous in the example we had earlier if you don't specifically call out first and second degree murder. If you just say murder, that's not going to give them a guideline of okay, they did the analysis for first degree, they did the analysis for second degree. That's what we asked them for.
Right, exactly. And then I think after you've got, this initial kind of structure with headers, then you've got to go back to the facts. And just as if you were handwriting out with scratch paper, you've got to go fact by fact through the question and note which facts match each legal issue or trigger sub-issues. And you got to insert them into the outline. And I can't say this enough, but you have to go fact by fact. Now, the exam making software, I don't think makes this as easy to do as when you could handwrite mark up the question, because we had all these tricks on paper. It was you could use check marks, you could cross things off as you include them. It's a little trickier on the computer, so you have to be very methodical, because almost pretty much every single fact is going to be important. And if you forget a fact, you might be leaving analysis on the table, and that's not good for your grade.
Right, because most of your points ultimately come from this analysis. So,
yep.
It's not enough just to sort of note that a fact exists in the abstract. You need to really explain that. Why is that fact important? What are the repercussions of that? What sort of ambiguity maybe does that create? Or what direction does that point you in? And I think the outlining process hopefully can help you figure out this is what this relates to. And you want to make sure you're not being conclusory. Even if you're running short on time, you've got to use those because phrases this element is met because of, and then give your facts, that type of thing.
Right.
That doesn't have to be super laborious, but you do really need to do it, because otherwise you're not going to get those analysis points.
Yeah. I was meeting with someone recently who had failed the bar, and they were having time management issues. And this person said to me, well, I just realized that what I really need to do is just do issue, rule, and conclusion. And then I can just get through the question much faster. And I was like, no, stop. That's exactly the wrong thing to be spending time on. Oh my gosh, that's not where the points come from. But I think it can be so hard to remember that, because I understand from a student perspective, it feels that way. The analysis can be the most lengthy part, but that's where the majority of your points come from. So if you have to condense I want shorter and more concise rule statements, shorter and more concise conclusions, shorter and more concise headers, but not shorter and more concise analysis. That's where the points come from.
Right. I think sometimes people also waste time just like reciting facts. And it's like, those are in the question. Like, you don't need to write them down unless you're using them.
Yep. And if you are not convinced of this, I think that you also have to go back to what this test is allegedly testing. So if you have ever known or worked with or worked as a paralegal, right? Paralegals are not supposedly, we could debate whether they are, but not supposedly trained in thinking like a lawyer, right? And the piece that's the thinking like a lawyer is this taking a fact pattern and applying it to the law to make legal analysis recommendations. That's supposed to be what we're trained to do. So why would our licensing exam leave that part out? That's actually what we're supposed to be trained in. That's supposed to differentiate us from other people that work in the legal profession.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So after you have done all of this fact mashing, I am so evangelical about the facts that you have to go back and double check it again, because you really can't leave anything on the table. And so you've got to make sure that you've covered everything that was raised in the questions. And if you have those facts in your outline, then you're really going to pretty efficiently be able to turn your outline into an answer. So that extra moment of going through and making sure you didn't forget anything is critical.
Right. I think this is where, depending on your exam software, you can use things like highlighting and whatnot. If you use a fact, you can highlight it. And then if you look back and you're like, oh, there's some stuff missing, or whatever. You don't need to spend a ton of time doing this in like a fancy way, but there definitely are quick ways that you could probably practice and try out that hopefully would help you see like, oh, that whole sentence, I haven't highlighted anything. I wonder if there's anything important in that sentence, because I'm guessing there probably is.
Yep. So then it's time to start writing, and you want to write issue by issue. I'm not a big fan of writing out of order. I know some people think that that's a better way to do it, but I think that you just are setting yourself up to forgetting things. So I think
what do
you just
mean,
gotta
out of order, like
start with like a middle issue. Like I just like to go through, start at the top and like write the answer.
Right. I mean, this is not a time to get creative with your formatting and like structure.
No, and to just say like, oh, well, that's a major issue, so I'm going to like do that one first, because I think then you're spending all this time like moving throughout the question. You risk like leaving something, accidentally deleting something. Just start at the top, note what are the major issues you need to spend the most time on, and just move through it. Just keep going, work efficiently.
Right, exactly. And I think you want to take your, these things from your outline, the headers, basically put them in. And then, like you said, you've got to be keeping track of the clock, but you've got to move through in like a very efficient sort of way.
Mm-hmm. So one question that we have discussed a lot internally, I know everybody's sad they're not in these team meetings where we discuss things like scratch paper outlining. I know everybody's wishing they were part of our team right now. But
hey, apply online.
Exactly. But we talked about what window in the software you should draft the outline, because most of the exam software options seem to include some sort of digital scratch paper window. And there's been a debate among students about whether or not you should use it. And we think that it's probably best to like let it be and just use the answer window for a couple of reasons. One is copying and pasting. Oh my gosh, how many copy and paste errors we've heard of when under stress? It's just like a lot.
Or people who expected to be able to copy and paste and they couldn't make it work in the moment. And you don't know if that's because their software wasn't working or because they were stressed out and doing it wrong, but like they weren't able to copy and paste, and then they feel like that caused them to fail the exam.
Yeah, it's just not worth it. It's just like one more element that can go wrong. I also think that the windows, most people are taking this on a laptop, and the windows are pretty small. Like having another window, it's just like window and question window and answer window and scratch paper window. It's not pretty. It's not pretty.
Yeah, and the organization on a lot of these windows isn't really that intuitive or that great. So I do think people definitely want to practice doing this in as close to the format as they can, not just kind of like, oh, I tried it in Word and I made like a separate Word document. Like that's not what you're dealing with on these things.
Right. Yeah, you got to practice with it all on one screen. Like right now, I'm sitting and looking at my workstation, and I have a laptop that's running my notes for this podcast, and I have my external monitor that's running my recording software and all this stuff. And like, if I was practicing this for an exam scenario, I'd have to do everything on the laptop. I can't have my extra monitors. Some of this stuff for studying can be nice, but when it comes to practicing, you have to recreate the exam scenario so you can get comfortable working with this limited visible space.
Yeah, it's definitely different. It feels very different.
It does.
And, some of them are split like top to bottom, and like that's kind of weird for people. There's just a lot of strange like UI choices going on, basically.
Well, I mean, I don't think that the best UI people have been working on exam software.
I'm gonna say that's probably true.
I feel like they're working other places.
Yeah, exactly. Probably not the most interesting like tech job you could get.
Right, exactly. So I don't know. People like it. Some people don't. I think it just has too many opportunities for a mistake, and I'm not into easy mistakes. So try it out, but try using just the answer window, try using the scratch paper, but make sure you are practicing in the software and pick which way you're going to do it and then do it in exam day. No game time decisions, guys. Got to practice this stuff.
No, and I just have like such nightmares about people accidentally like typing their answer into the digital window or something like that. I mean, just like unbelievable stuff. But I'm sure that happened at least once.
I'm sure. Oh, that'd be heartbreaking. I know. Ugh. Okay, so what about nonlinear thinkers? You, as our resident nonlinear thinker, who likes to like make bubbles and mind maps and charts with lots of colors. So what do you do when you have to outline on a computer?
Well, I mean, it is really hard for me. I think I would definitely probably do worse on these questions just because it's like such a foreign way of thinking to me. I am all about like the color and the bubbles and the facts are red and the law is blue. Like I had a very specific way of doing this. So, like everyone else, basically, I would have to train myself to do this and just kind of hope for the best. I think you can do similar things. It's just a little bit, it's different to be like highlighting stuff in an answer and then like writing down that piece and then going back and that kind of thing. It's just harder to do, but you've got to figure it out.
So do you think there would have been, like, if you were studying for the bar right now, do you think you would do any kind of your mind map exercises as part of your practice, or would you just force yourself to use the computer all the time?
I mean, I think maybe if I was like struggling a lot to like kind of read a question or something, but the thing is like, there's no point in doing that more than like once or twice. You can't be doing that throughout the study process because that's just not the exam you're taking. And I think the sooner you switch to this new process, the easier it's going to become and the more natural it's going to feel. So, I'm sure that like I could have figured out things to do eventually if I'd done it on enough practice essays that would have helped me do this. But I don't think there's any point in, it's kind of like you can't just keep taking open book exams. Like, yeah, you do better on them, but that's not the exam you're taking. You have to switch. Yeah.
I think that realizing that you can create new habits even if you don't like them is very critical. And I think, we can use this COVID time as a great lesson, right? Most of us didn't have any habits of masking or sanitizing or doing all of these things that now are very common practices for us, right? I don't actually really think about it because I do all of these things over and over again. Actually, changing my habits the other way is like more shocking to my system now because I'm so used to things being a certain way, but we can create new habits. And so one of the things you have to do is just constantly tell yourself that every time you invest in doing it this way, even if it's uncomfortable, is going to create a new habit. And what you want by the bar is for it not to feel awkward anymore. You want it to feel very normalized. And the only way you can do that is by doing something every day. I mean, I can't remember. It's like 28 days to a habit, 60 days to a habit, whatever it is.
Probably depends. You have plenty of, but it's a lot.
It's a lot, but you have time to do that during the bar study if you practice this way every day that you study.
Right. And I think this is definitely one of those cases where sometimes we talk to people who failed and we ask them if they took practice exams and they say, well, yeah, kind of, I outlined it. This is not, even more so, I think that's always a terrible idea just to outline your essays and not to actually write them. But even more so now, I think you have to do the whole process. You have to go from that question to your online outline and then to the writing because those are different steps in the process, and just sort of identifying the issue and figuring out what facts apply is not sufficient to actually write your answer.
Yeah. And up next, we're talking about the MPT, and I think this is even more critical because I think outlining for the MPT is even more difficult than outlining for your essays.
Oh, for sure.
It's the volume of information.
Yeah.
So this was also a big team meeting where we talked about this, and all of us were a bit scratching our heads, having to sat down and tried to do these by outlining on the computers. I mean, again, I don't know why everyone's not dropping applications right this minute to work for us. This sounds like so much fun.
Who does not want to explore different ways to do an online outline for the MPT?
I know. I should next talk about my blue booking project. And
Wowly.
I know.
We're just going to get a flood of people dying.
Flood of applications. But for the MPT, we had kind of a split with the online bar exam between who would allow scratch paper and who wouldn't. I think it's completely silly not to allow scratch paper because you can't cheat on the law on the MPT. I think that's kind of silly. But again, nobody asked me. So some jurisdictions allow scratch paper, some don't. So we're going to talk about when you do not have scratch paper and you have to outline on the computer. So again, a bit brutal, but you've got to practice this way. You know, it just is what it is. But just like if you were outlining on paper, like what you want to do is kind of apply that process to the online scenario. So you read the task memo, and where I would jot down things on my scratch paper, immediately I do want to outline points from the task memo in my answer window. Again, we like the answer window over the scratch paper window. And then when you go into the next part of the PT, which we recommend to be the library, because the library is generally where we see the structure, because the structure often comes from the law. Even though we can be a little flexible, and I like doing the file first, but in this scenario, I believe that I am now on team library to do that first. You know, you want to make sure that as you're pulling out law, as you're taking notes, that you are marking down page numbers on that PDF so you can go back and find stuff. Because I think one of the other challenging things about the online PT, whether you have paper, scratch paper or not, is you can't mark up the question. Like, right. I mean, my questions always had like stars next to them and like, yay, here's the law, like circled, so I could flip through quickly and see that stuff. And you can't do that anymore. So you really need to make sure that you note page numbers and make it easy for you to go back and find the law that you need to, write out verbatim. Because you're not going to be like typing these long rule statements into your outline when you don't even know yet what you need to talk about.
Right. You kind of got to get the structure somehow, what this essay is even going to look like. And then you can start filling in the pieces. But you don't want to just be scrolling randomly back and forth. It's like, oh, yeah, that seemed like an important fact, and it was on page 4. Okay, great.
Right. So, you go to that file. You've got maybe your structure from the library, but you're still digging for legally significant facts and making page number notations. Back in the olden days when we would highlight on paper, so oftentimes people would really spend way too much time highlighting everything. Like I remember seeing like a deposition and you'd see somebody's highlighting and they've literally highlighted every sentence of the deposition. like every sentence of the deposition is not a legally significant fact. So it's really forcing you to get good at identifying what are legally significant facts and just other random facts. This is not like the essay question, which almost every fact is legally significant. This is a different ballgame. So you're really hunting for things to put in your outline, and it's forcing you to be a bit more laser focused.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I think the other moment that can be missed on the online bar exam is the stopping and thinking moment. So we are big fans of stopping and thinking. Literally, our students get handouts with a big stop sign on them that say stop and think.
Before you start writing.
Before you start writing. So these are the things that they see burned into their brain when they are doing their test. But I want people to still take this moment to evaluate their answer and make sure that they have it right before they start writing. And I think when you're on the computer, because the busy work can kind of take over, you're typing, it's all on the computer. You're not like transitioning from paper to computer. You may not want to take that extra minute to really evaluate whether you've got the right answer. And I think that's a huge mistake because you want to make sure you're confident before you start putting in the work. And so you've got to confirm your organization and make sure it makes sense. And if you really are having trouble doing this, I would recommend that you stop, think, and breathe and make sure that you practice taking a certain number of deep breaths because it's also helpful that you're going to flood your brain with oxygen, which is going to make you think clearer. Since one of the things we do when we're stressed is we don't breathe deeply, and then our brains don't get enough oxygen, and then it's harder to think clearly. So it's even a great moment to like flood your body with helpful oxygen so you can think in your brightest way and then put good solid answers on the paper.
Right. And particularly if you struggle with any type of test anxiety on any scale, you know, that moment of like, okay, like, let me take some deep breaths. Let me get this going. You know, it can really help you rather than kind of spiraling off into like, oh my God, what if I missed something? You know, that moment of just, okay, now we're ready to go. Like, let's go. And then you start writing. Yeah.
It's really, breathing is such an underutilized test taking technique. It really is. And in life, how many times, you know, I've taken a deep breath before responding to something or saying something. It's so important. It's a good life skill. So deep breathing to really make sure that you're taking that moment to evaluate what you're doing, because you've got to think about what you do before you do it. And just because you can type really fast doesn't mean that you have the right answer.
Right. I mean, if you spend a quarter of the essay on what should be a very minor issue, like that's not going to get you very many points.
Yeah, exactly. So again, like this outlining process isn't really new. If you've taken the bar exam before, you took a class where you practiced, you know, using the paper, outlining the paper packet, it's not new. It's just a different format. So the other thing to remind yourself is that you're not learning a new skill. You just are applying it a slightly different way, but you can create new habits and still be successful. There's just going to be a learning curve, and hey, that learning curve is probably not going to be pleasant, but you know, lots of learning curves aren't. So you just got to suck it up and do it because these are the rules of the game.
Right. And what has been interesting, I will say, with most of these online bar exams is the pass rates have been higher than people expected them to be. They've actually been higher than average.
Yeah, that first October one.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah. So it's like some people are finding their benefits to it. I think a lot of students with anxiety prefer taking it online. I think that's been an overwhelming message that I've heard.
Right. And even people without, I think a lot of them are saying, well, you know, I didn't think this was going to be that great, but it actually did save me a lot of stress. And I kind of like being in my own house. And I like having, I think people were telling me, you know, they like having these shorter sections.
Yeah.
So, you know, rather than sitting there for 3 hours and trying to debate, like, is it worth it to go to the bathroom? You just have a shorter test session and you know that you only have to sit there for like X amount of time.
It's true.
So I think that's actually, you know, a number of people are not sad about that.
Yeah, we used to encourage people to discipline themselves to take a minute to stand up or stretch or walk to the bathroom and walk back, you know, to
can't do that part now, but at least you know how long you have to sit.
But at least you know how long you have to sit, and you're not sitting for the same, amount of time. I guess that's another great point as part of this is, you know, when you're doing these under timed conditions, make sure that as you get closer and closer to the exam, you are practicing in the chunks that you're going to need to sit for the exam. So, you know, in California, if it's a 1 hour and then you get a 10-minute break or whatever, however, they always release that information before the test. Start mimicking that so you can feel good about it.
Yeah, because this is your opportunity to really dial it in to be exactly the same as it is on test day in a way that you definitely cannot if you're going to like a giant convention center and standing in line and having 1,000 people in a room. Like, you can actually control your environment. You can get yourself very used to this, and you can get your process down with all of these outlining things and just, you know, get it done.
Yeah. I also would like to say that I think this happened more during the first online exam. There was lots of chatter about cheating, like lots of chatter about like hacking the system, copying, pasting things. There were lots of YouTube videos, and just don't get distracted by all of that stuff. Just do the work and you can pass this test. I think that oftentimes when anything is different, and you know, things are going to, as soon as the world starts opening up, something's going to be different. Some things are going to stay the same. We don't even know. I'm done like hypothesizing what the future looks like. I'm over it. I'm living in the moment. But, you know, there are future changes coming, and it is just really important to just stay focused on the task at hand and don't get caught up in the drama.
Right. And I think some of that around outlining is not getting caught up in like, well, it would be so much easier if I could do it this other way. Like, I feel your pain. I would really struggle with this, but I would also know that the only way to pass the test is to figure out how to get it done.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, stay focused. Well, with that, we're kind of out of time. Any final thoughts about having to outline?
No, the only thing I would say is just really force yourself to do that practice in this format. And it's going to be, in the end, much better than if you're writing better exams that you're actually outlining on paper, because that's not the test you're taking right now.
Exactly. I mean, hey, it's not like this is fun, but you know what's less fun? Doing it again.
Right.
So there you go.
Get it done.
Just get it done. All right. Well, with that, we are out of time. I want to take a second to remind you to check out our blog at barexamtoolbox.com, which is full of helpful tips to help you prepare and stay sane as you study for the bar exam. You can also find information on our website about our courses, tools, and one-on-one tutoring programs to support you as you study for the UBE or California bar exam. I mentioned earlier in the podcast, we just redid our Writing of the Week program for the UBE, which even includes tips for online bar takers. If you enjoyed this episode of the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you are still in law school, you might also like to check out our popular Law School Toolbox podcast as well. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at lee@barexamtoolbox.com or Alison@barexamtoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at barexamtoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.